name is Paul, and I want to thank you all for coming to Theology on Tap tonight. Tonight we have a guest speaker, Deacon Chris Heanue. He's a deacon over at Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which is about a 10-minute walk, which I obviously do not walk. So, he's going to talk on Pope Francis, and the title of his talk is called The Francis Effect. So if we could just give him a round of applause.
My name is Deacon Chris Heanue. As Paul said, I'm stationed just down the block at Our Lady of Mount Carmel. I'm a transitional deacon, which means I'm on the road to priesthood. I'll be ordained a priest within a year and a half's time or so. I'm working currently becoming a hospital chaplain and also studying. Asked me to do this Theology on Tap. We decided that we should address Pope Francis. There seems to be, not just in New York City, but around the world, something that's been coined the Francis Effect. Times Man of the Year, Rolling Stone, on the cover of Rolling Stone this month, making the front pages of newspapers and journals, but for actual good news, not bad news that's been plaguing our church. Drawing nearly double the pilgrims to Vatican City, close to 6.6 million just in 2013, more than double his predecessor. What is it about him that makes him so affable? What is it that makes this Francis Effect? Found was that Pope Francis is so easy to read about, but he's so hard to actually read. It has been noted that the Holy Father likes to describe his point using three smaller points. And more recently in Catholic news services, this point was made again, that Pope Francis likes to speak in threes. And so, if one wants to truly do him justice, I too will speak in threes. It's good for organization, and it's good that you'll know when I'm about to end. Underlying the person of Jorge Bergoglio is a deep understanding of the need to foster and appreciate the dignity that each one of us as humans deserves, as each one of us as God's creatures deserve, because we are formed in God's image and God's likeness. Therefore, keep in mind that throughout this lecture, underlying all of the excerpts that I will share, is an understanding that Jorge Bergoglio cares for the dignity of each person. I have decided to narrow it down to this. The Pope Francis Effect, if understood properly, is meant to lead us to a deeper understanding of the human person in how we live, in how we love, and how we laugh. Live, love, and laugh. One thing that Francis is known for is his humility. As Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he preferred to navigate the city in buses and trains. He has never owned a cell phone, or a laptop, or a computer. He chose the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi, a man who is known for his disregard for material possessions. Pope Francis chose not to live in the papal apartment, or palace as media likes to describe, but chose to live in an apartment or a hotel in the property of the Vatican. Instead of riding in the back seat of a Mercedes with leather seats, he rides in the back seat of a lesser model with fabric seats. These small gestures teach us of his simplicity and his humility. In his interview soon after being elected, he began by answering the question, who is for Jorge Bergoglio, by saying, I am a sinner. Francis states, the joy of evangelizing always arises from grateful remembrance. It is a grace which we constantly need to implore. The apostles never forgot the moment when Jesus touched their hearts. The apostles never forgot the moment when Jesus touched their hearts. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we read in the Gospel of John. Francis notes the exact moment when he found his vocation. Heading to the train station to meet his friends, young Jorge stopped into a church to go to confession. Quote, something strange happened to me in that confession. I don't know what it was, but something changed my life. He adds that it was not only the astonishment of the encounter, but the compassionate way in which God called him. In Evangelii Gaudium, he states, sometimes we are tempted to find excuses and complain, acting as if we could only be happy if 1,000 conditions were met. He goes on to say in the same document, I never tire of repeating those words of Benedict XVI. Being a Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, a person, which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direct clear his deep respect for his predecessor. This respect, which sadly does not seem to translate in the public media biases. On the subject of economy, Pope Francis uses very strong words. When we read the gospel, he says, we find a clear indication, not so much our friends and wealthy neighbors, but above all the poor and the sick, those who are usually despised, overlooked, those who cannot repay you. May we never abandon them. He says, money must serve, not rule. It's a struggle to live, and often to live with precious little dignity. He goes on to say, the culture of prosperity deadens us. We are thrilled if the market offers us something new to purchase. In the meantime, all those lives stunted for lack of opportunity seem a mere spectacle. They fail to move us. He rebukes the trickle-down theories of economics by stating that this opinion has never been confirmed by facts. But he has also critiqued Marxism. The ideology of Marxism is wrong, he says. Francis emphasizes the need to go out, to go forth, to heed the command of the gospel and spread the good news. In Evangelii Gaudium, he states, a church which goes forth is a church whose doors are open, going out to others in order to reach the fringes of humanity does not mean rushing out aimlessly into the world. Often it is better simply to slow down, to put aside our eagerness in order to see and listen to others, to stop rushing from one thing to another, and to remain with someone who has faltered along the way. He says, at times we have to be like the father of the prodigal son, who always keeps his door open, so that when the son returns, he can readily pass. He teaches us to live as to see God in every person's life. He says, I have a dogmatic certainty that God is in every person's life. God is in everyone's life. Even if the life of that person has been a disaster, even if it is destroyed by vices, drugs, or anything else, God is in this person's life. There is always a space in which the good seed can grow. You have to trust God, even if that life has been a disaster, was the words he used. His clear emphasis on the poor, the lowly, and the outcast is evident in his writings and in many of his homilies. He speaks of the dignity that work brings to us. He says, work anoints a person with dignity. We eat what we earn. We support our families with what we earn. It is ironic that as he emphasizes the need to go to the periphery in our society, it is the periphery where the wealthy go. Think of the Hamptons, Montauk, Huntington, Connecticut. It's the periphery in our American society where the wealthy go. But Pope Francis is reminding us that we have to go to the periphery, to the outcasts, not to the wealthy, but in our society, rather to the inner city. Echoing the words of the late John Paul II, a society will be judged on the basis of how it treats its weakest. Francis reminds us that holiness can be found in all walks of life. Quote, I see the holiness in the patience of the people of God. A woman who is raising children, a man who works to bring home the bread, the sick, the elderly, priests who have so many wounds, but have a smile on their faces because they serve the Lord, and the sisters who work hard and live a hidden sanctity. This, for me, is the common sanctity. He notes that it is very important for the teacher to give a good example, and that we must live bearing testimony. He says, we need to remember that all religious teaching ultimately has to be reflected in the teacher's way of life, which awakens the assent of the heart by its nearness, love, and witness. In teaching us how to live, Pope Francis can appear very challenging. I think of the number of challenges he has given to the bishops, the priests, and the deacons of the church. He challenges us not to become sourpusses. He challenges us not to become swarmy, not to become social butterflies, although I'm not a social butterfly. Not to become comfortable, but rather to have the smell of the sheep. To become a field hospital after battle. To many, his recent decision to ban the honorary title of Monsignor may seem to be just another slap in the face to his priests. I believe, as with all things, it is how you approach this. If you understand it with the right context and with the assistance of the Holy Spirit, one can understand that these are not slaps in the face, but rather motivational challenges, which we as God's faithful ministers must be willing to undertake. Just last week, Francis said during one of his homilies in support of the priesthood, and something that we hear so often, he said, people would approach me and say, but Father, I have read it in the newspaper that a bishop has done such a thing, or a priest who has done this such a thing. Oh yes, I read it too. Tell me though, do the papers carry the news of what great charity so many priests in so many parishes of the city and the countryside perform? Of the great work they do in carrying their people forward? No, this is not news. It is the same as always. A single falling tree makes more noise than a forest that grows. Today, think about this anointing of David. It will do us good to think of our brave, holy, good, faithful bishops and priests and pray for them. We are here today thanks to them. He said in one of his interviews that 3 words constitute a man: permission, thanks, and forgiveness. Again, his theory of 3s. 3 words constitute a man: permission, asking in humility, not barging through life; thanks, being grateful. He says, manners make the man. Gratitude blossoms like a flower. And forgiveness. He says, only a person who experiences forgiveness can truly forgive. For me, he says, hope is in the human person. It is what lies in his or her heart. I believe in man. I'm not saying that man is good or bad, just that I believe in man, in the dignity and greatness of this person. Now, love. Love is a short one. Promise. Love is fleeting. It's like the wind. There is a thin line for Francis between living and loving. For our Catholic tradition, teaching reminds us that it is through proper living that we love, and it is through love that we properly live. I just wanted to spend a brief moment on Francis's understanding of how love is found in the role of women, in those with same-sex attraction, the unborn, and the youth. In regards to women, the Church acknowledges the indispensable contribution which women make to society through the sensitivity, intuition, and other distinctive skill sets which they, more than men, tend to possess. At the foot of the cross, he says, at the supreme hour of the new creation, Christ led us to Mary. He brought us to her because he did not want us to journey without a mother. And our people read in this maternal image all the mysteries of the gospel. The Lord did not want to leave the church without this icon of womanhood. However, contrary to popular belief, the question of admitting women to the priesthood is, quote, not open for discussion. Regardless, Francis, recognizing the importance of women in the church, is calling for a better understanding and appreciation for the qualities that women bring to the forefront. Women are asking questions, he says. They must be addressed. Of persons with same-sex attraction. Recognizing the dignity of all human life, Francis, responding to a question on homosexual priests, said, if they love the Lord and have goodwill, who am I to judge them? Adding that gay priests should not be marginalized. A tendency to homosexuality isn't the problem. They are our brothers. Described by many as a, quote, gesture of openness, was only restating that which we as faithful Catholics already knew. That if they follow God's commands, if they are held accountable to, that we are all held accountable to, we all remain in God's love. Of the unborn. Among the vulnerable for whom the Church wishes to care with particular love and concern are the unborn, the most defenseless and innocent among us. He says nowadays efforts are made to deny them their human dignity and to do with them whatever one pleases, taking their lives and passing laws preventing anyone from standing in the way of this. Human beings are ends in themselves and never a means of resolving other problems. And finally, he says, it is not progressive to try to resolve problems by eliminating a human life. On the other hand, it is also true that we have done little to adequately accompany women in very difficult situations, where abortion appears as a quick solution to their profound anguish, especially when the life developing within them is the result of rape or a situation of extreme poverty. Once again, recognizing the need to accompany women and strive to be better agents of love. And finally, the youth. Even if it's not always easy to approach young people, he says, progress has been made in two areas. One, the awareness that the entire community is called to evangelize and educate the young. And two, the need for the young to exercise greater leadership. Something he said which truly moved me. He was talking about children who, when they're in that stage of growing up and they ask why for everything, why this, why that. He says, children need to talk so that they feel looked at. Children need to talk so that they feel looked at. A perfect example of his recognition of the dignity of all creatures, all God's creatures, and the desire for human contact. Part 3, humor. Pope Francis is truly a joy-filled man. He has had a number of one-liners that have been recorded, whether in his interviews or his apostolic exhortation, when he called us sourpusses, a word that I would never have seen in a church document before. When discussing his cooking abilities, he said, well, no one has ever died. He's almost had people rolling in the aisles of their seats when a group of cardinals suggested that he take the name Clement, which would ironically have been a tribute to the Pope who suppressed the Jesuits in 1767. Even quoting from a German cardinal during one of his angeluses, he said as an aside, listen, I don't want you to think that I'm doing publicity for my cardinals. Speak for their book sales. Speaking to the cardinals of the church, he remarked, like good wine that improves with age, let us old folks give youth the wisdom of life. In conclusion, I quickly want to address the media coverage, the media craze, and how one hand truly doesn't know what the other hand is doing. Just comparing Times Person of the Year magazine to the Rolling Stones' recent article, I'd like to point out something unique. Quoting from Time magazine, quote, many assumed Francis with those words was changing church doctrine. Instead, he was merely changing its tone. From Rolling Stones, the Pope's total change doesn't necessarily signal a wild swing from tradition. Two articles who are strictly contradicting each other in just the idea of the Pope's tone. Who are we to try to understand the Pope's tone, but only in the proper context? A Catholic journalist for Fox News compared Francis to Obama, stating, God help us. Like Obama, Francis is unable to see the problems that are really endangering his people. Like Obama, he mistakes the faithful for the enemy for his friend, condescension for respect, socialism for justice, and capitalism for tyranny. A Catholic reporter. Adam Shaw continues, my fellow Catholics should be suspicious when bastions of anti-Catholicism in the left-wing media are in love with him. And more recently, in the New York Post, they published an article just this past week entitled, "Meet the New Pope, Same as the Old Pope." Journalist Kyle Smith writes, "It is hard for liberals and maybe for some conservatives to wrap their heads around this, but Catholicism doctrine doesn't line up neatly with American views of left and right. The Church is steadfastly pro-life on abortion. We associate that with conservatives, but equally pro-life on capital punishment, a view we call liberal. Nor has the Vatican altered its commitment to uplifting the poor or its related suspicion of Catholics." And Pope Francis gets the last word. "If anyone feels offended by my words," this is a quote from him, "I would respond that I speak them with affection and with the best of intentions, quite apart from any personal interest or political ideology. My words are not those of a foe or an opponent. I am interested only in helping those who are in thrall to an individualistic, indifferent, and self-centered mentality, to be freed from those unworthy chains and to attain a way of living and thinking which is more humane, noble, and fruitful, and which will bring dignity to their presence on this earth." Thank you for your attention, and thank you, everybody.